Terry Clausen, Central Valley, Coachella Valley Irrigated Lands Coalition, and we're going over the agenda real quick. Program background, it will be brief overview. The new reporting requirements that are coming up we'll review some of those, and then entering your data onto the portal, what's involved there. And then I started to talk about nitrogen crop coefficients. I forget to always put crop in there. So we all have irrigation coefficients for our various crops. It is different. This is related to the nitrogen removed by your particular crop compared to the amount of nitrogen that is applied. Go over that a little bit more. And then there's another plan somewhat related to the Irrigated Lands Program called the Salt and Nutrient Management Plan. So we're going to give you an overview of that and show how that's going to kind of relate to what we're doing here in the Irrigated Lands Program. And then an update on the surface and groundwater monitoring that's occurred in the region, and then a discussion or a little overview of what's going on with the membership fees. You've all noticed they had to go up quite a bit more that the coalition is going to be doing now, and we'll explain it a little bit of that later. Okay, next slide. So the regional board that you have here is one of 9 regions throughout the state. These regional water boards are responsible for implementing the Irrigated Lands Program in their respective areas. Irrigated Lands started in 2003 in the Central Valley, Central Coast. A few years later here, it started out with just surface water monitoring and surface water requirements. Then it switched, the beginnings of switching over to fertilizer reporting with what's called the East San Joaquin Order that was adopted in 2012, was petitioned, changed to the State Water Board, and then finalized several years later. That's really what the result that we have now. But the regional board is it's made up of board members appointed by the state, and then the staff members, the folks you have here, are hired by the respective regional boards throughout the state. The regional board for Colorado River is based in Palm Desert, so their office is nearby, but they cover this where you can see number 7 all the way to the border of California to Riverside County on our east, and there's actually some of the county in there and all the way down to San Diego, excluding the coastal area of San Diego. Okay, next slide. And the mission, of course, is to protect beneficial uses of both surface and groundwater. Beneficial uses are the environment, drinking water, and agriculture. So those are beneficial uses assigned to all waters of California, including all groundwater. And this is just a real brief history for the first orders were adopted. As I mentioned, the 2012 is when the fertilizer reporting requirements were added to the Central Valley and Central Coast. 2014, the first conditional waiver came in to the Colorado Basin. And then in 2018 is when they added, when the state board and respective regional boards added all this yield reporting in addition to the nitrogen reporting. And we'll come back to this, but the main reason is to try to determine what amount of excess fertilizer may be leaching past the root zone into groundwater. That's the main reason that yield was added to that requirements. And then 2021, the revised order for Coachella Valley and the other Colorado River Basin regions, ag regions, also had their orders adopted in 2021. Okay, next slide. So here is the membership or the Coachella Valley Coalition boundary. You can see that where it extends here from on this map. It's essentially the irrigated lands of this area. You can see the main Coachella Canal snaking across the eastern side of the basin, as well as the down, up, and then south, as you all know very well. And last year, as of actually October of this year, we had 39,000 and change irrigated acres, as you can see, plus 71 members. And we'll come back to that at the end. But this is what we had available for supporting the organization to comply with the regulations, to help you all comply with these regulations. Okay, next slide. So our annual dues at this, as you saw in your invoice this year, went up to $8 an acre. Number of reasons why that went up. One is that the state board assesses all the irrigated lands in the state with the same amount of per acre per acreage fee that then goes into a state fund that funds all the regional boards throughout the state. So this irrigated lands program, when I started in the Central Valley in 2003, was 12 cents an acre. It's currently $1.42 an acre. It went up, went approximately 10 cents this past year. And this fee is set by the state, set by the legislature. It's adopted statewide, and then it is collected by the coalitions that represent the growers in those areas. So CVILC collects the $1.42, then we write a check to the state water board on your behalf for the acreage that's covered by Coachella Valley Irrigated Lands Coalition. Now, if somebody were to take an individual permit, which there aren't many in the whole state, their fees are considerably more. They have a per operation base fee, and then depending on complexity and the size of their operation, their fees can be in the thousands of dollars per operation plus acreage fees. So it's quite a bit cheaper for a grower to belong to a third party, a coalition. And so these fees on our side cover the membership management, the groundwater and surface water sampling and monitoring. And then more recently, what's added this year is a portal for you to report your fertilizer use and yield into. So we have an online portal that saves a lot of time. There is an upfront investment that we made in this, but over time, it's way more convenient to use the portal for reporting and tracking, and it's really your own internal record keeping software available to members. Okay, next slide. So this is something you all know about. Anybody that has commercial irrigated acreage needs to have representation to the regional water board through either an individual permit or a coalition permit. So if you irrigate, you sell the produce, you need to be involved in a permit process. This is statewide, not just this area. There's no minimum acreage. If you're just a small farmers market type person, even those sorts of facilities need to be involved or be part of either a coalition or have an individual permit. And then for CVILC, yeah, you can belong to our organization if you're located in that map boundary that I showed you earlier. So Irrigated Lands in Imperial Valley has a coalition in that area, and all the other farming areas here in the Colorado Basin have their own third parties that the acreage in those respective areas are located. Okay, next slide. All right, so the grower responsibility for compliance is obviously obtain coverage, get an individual permit or join a coalition, implement management practices that are protective of surface and groundwater, prepare plans and reports on the practices that you use on your farm. Those are reported in a farm plan. And these are intended to be really kind of an inventory of what are you doing on your farm to protect surface and groundwater. And when that report is filled out, it's kind of a template type document. But before the Irrigated Lands program, none of the regulatory entities knew what we were doing to protect surface and groundwater. I mean, when we were negotiating those orders decades ago, there was no record of what are we doing already in our operations to protect surface and groundwater. So these plans really give an idea to the public and others to know that we actually are doing a lot of things on our farms to protect our water quality. And then that's in the farm plan, that's that practice inventory. And then the new report is the irrigation nitrogen management plan summary. We call that a summary that is then compiled from in this year instance, you're compiling what you did this year to fertilize and irrigate, and then you're going to report it next year. That's the summary report. But earlier this year and every year, you want to fill out your worksheet, the plan that you would keep on the farm. You wouldn't turn into us. And this is kind of a tool that gives you an idea compared to what your crop coefficients are, of where you are insofar as possible excess applications or comparison to other growers of similar crops. This plan worksheet is not turned in, it's kept on the farm. However, if the regional board staff ever did a facility inspection, these are the types of documents they would ask you to produce. So it's a good idea to keep them in a file. They're pretty straightforward. You also will have them on the portal, held out in the portal. If you ever get an inspection, you just go open your portal and there's all your documents that you've completed through the years. All right, next slide. So, and then our responsibility as an organization is to assist you all with compliance with this program and to be an intermediary between yourself and the water board. So if there are issues that come up, we represent you to the water board. We go into water board staff meetings and other venues to talk about concerns and things that may be need to be known by the regional board staff, which is different from the board itself. So anyway, there's two audiences that we are intermediaries for you all toward. And then paying the state water board fees on your behalf. That $1.4647 that I mentioned earlier, that's something that we then write a check once a year to the state water board on your behalf. Okay, next slide. And then continuing our responsibilities is we're conducting a surface and groundwater trend monitoring network that we've been doing for a couple of years. We'll get some results here shortly. And then eventually, as we're developing and understanding our groundwater program, we're going to be putting together restoration plans that will be long-term plans about how what the water quality is and what restoration efforts might be needed. And then lastly, but more importantly, if we do find problems, and especially when we're starting to work in this nitrogen management, is to hopefully encourage and work with you to implement management practices on your own farming operations. And there's a lot of work that's been done on efficient nitrogen management practices. You guys are probably the leaders in that you've faced really severe water restrictions, and your ability to manage water has a lot to do, everything to do with managing nitrogen. So we think we're in good shape down here, but we're going to be working to promote practices as they come up that might be helpful in this region as well. Okay, next slide. All right, so another part of the order that was adopted, and this has happened statewide, Central Valley, Central Coast have a requirement that was in the presidential order that if you have a domestic well on your farm, you need to sample that well. And if there's high nitrates above the drinking water standards, you need to inform the users of that well of that situation. So I know there's not a lot of domestic wells here, and the regional board is taking the lead on this programs. So they are putting together materials. We had a meeting this morning. They compiled some materials that were used in the Central Valley that they'll be distributing to you. They're going to share with us. We're going to put them on our website just to have them available for you if you need extra copies or didn't receive one at your operation. And the guidance sheets, the templates come out of or are used by the Central Valley Regional Board and growers in those areas. So they've been vetted and they've been changed and updated over the last couple of years. So they're pretty good templates for using for the groundwater well monitoring. And again, this is a domestic drinking water well that's used for any properties that are on your APN. If you have two APNs, there's a house separate from your farming operation, it doesn't apply to those homes. Similar to what pretty much statewide that way, because there are farms that have split off their homes in their APNs and they're not in irrigated lands program. Those do not fall under the drinking water testing requirement. Okay, next slide. Any questions about that? Anything more on this? Did I get that right, Emma and Jenny? You guys are going to be sending those out here. I know the and only if you do it for if you have drinking water, so you need to put up with it for hours. Okay, so it's just when it's a drinking water source. Got it. Yeah, and did you include list of labs? Because most commercial labs will do that. That test relatively inexpensive, $30, $40, I think.
already for whatever reason. You have to have 2 years of data, and if it's under the 10, then you have to use sampling. If you're over the 10, you need to keep sampling and notify people to use that, or stop using that. If you have any of those cases,
We monitor for county health. Is that sufficient?
if you monitor for county health, you provide us. I think you can go back 2 years. I think you go 2 years of data.
That would be further testing beyond what county health is already required. That's pretty extensive.
Yeah, if they're going to require you. You do have to submit the data to us. But if you ever have county health, if you complain that county health, you could probably put that in the
So Albert, is that in your APN with the property? Might be your packing house APN. Yeah.
I didn't fill it out. So.
Yeah. Okay. All right. One more reminder before. Oh, go ahead, Alyssa.
Perry, we couldn't really hear that here on Zoom. Was there anything in that conversation that would be helpful to the people on Zoom?
So if the domestic well is used for drinking, then it needs to be sampling. But if you're getting water in the tank that's not out of the well, that doesn't need to be tested. Or if you have the well that's not being used for drinking water, you don't have to test it. And then if you're over 10, you have to sample it every year for how long? I never have understood that.
If you're over 10, you just need to notify folks.
Oh, if it's over 10, you notify the users. Yeah. Yeah. Or give them bottled water. If it's under 10, 3 years in a row of sampling, then you're good. If it stays under 10.
5 years.
Oh, then you go to every 5 years. Okay. That's why I'm not the regulator. Okay. One more reminder, those that joined on Zoom, if you would put your membership name and your member ID in the chat room, and Alyssa will grab that. So I'm going to hand the microphone over to Melissa, and we're going to go back and forth today.
All right. Good morning, afternoon, everybody. I'm Melissa Turner. I'm with MLJ Environmental. We're your technical consultants. We help Coachella with your surface water and groundwater data reporting. Coachella Valley Water District actually does the monitoring for you still, which is great. It's a great partnership that the coalition has with the water district. But we help with the data management and the reporting to the regional board, as well as setting up your member portal. And that works in a couple of ways, of both with invoicing and member dues, and then also with getting your data to then report to the regional board on your behalf. So that includes your farm plans, which last year was the first year. And then now we have the INMP summary report. Okay, go ahead to the next slide. So some important timelines. We are going to take down the portal for a little bit, and then it'll be back online. And the reason we do that is we need to have it set up for the INMP summary report reporting. So, and that's a little bit of what I'll go through today. So you'll see some differences if you used it for your farm plan reporting, kind of how it looks different this year. That will be ready by November 14th. If it's sooner, you'll get it, regardless, you'll get an email, you'll be notified, you'll have all the information of how to access it in case you forgot from last year. And then the deadline of February 1st to get your INMP summary report and farm plan information entered into the portal. And I'll show you how it's kind of a continuum. You actually start with your INMP summary report and then build into the additional practices from your farm plan. We'll do then some follow-up between February and March if we have growers who haven't turned them in. That's where Alyssa will come in. She'll start calling and emailing, reminding you. We are really seeking 100% compliance when we submit to the regional board, which is due currently April 1st. We are working with regional board to see if we can get that extended to July. And what that does, if we can get that extension, it allows us a little more time to work with growers to get the data into the system, you know, qualify it, make sure everything looks good, see if there's anything odd about what's being reported. It's the first year with the nitrogen reporting, so we're expecting some of it's going to feel a little new, and there's going to be a lot of questions. So we want to make sure we've got enough time to really report accurately on your behalf. So we're in the works with that. And then up here at the top under the March timeline, just a reminder every year, that March timeline, you also need to be looking ahead. So if, for example, you had an inspection in April, regional board would ask for your INMP summer or INMP worksheet, which would be planning for your 2024 year. So as a reminder, your INMP worksheets plan for the year ahead. Your summary report looks the year behind. So when we talk about in the next part about reporting on your summary reports, we're looking at 2023. So kind of this last 12 months and your amount of nitrogen applied and your yield and the practices implemented. Okay, next slide. So the farm plan and the INMP summary report, the requirements in the order center on mostly management practices with the addition of the INMP asks for your amount of fertilizer, nitrogen applied in the different sources, whether it's irrigation water, fertilizer, compost, all of that split out and you have to report on, and then your harvested yield. But really both of these are centered on irrigation and nitrogen management practices, sediment erosion practices, pesticide practices, and then some information about your well. Because in the order, both of these plans have a duplication or a requirement to submit your irrigation and nitrogen management practices, the way we've built the portal is we only ask for that information once. So if you came to these meetings last year, I try to give you a heads up of like, next year, you're still only gonna have to report this once as you go through the portal. And that's to just make it easier when we report to the regional board to show compliance with both of those requirements. We use the same information and kind of present it both ways. So that's kind of just a visual of how that works. And then when we go through kind of some screenshots of the portal, you'll see hopefully a little better what I mean. Okay, so let's go through some of the portal. Perfect. This is your login page. This should all look familiar. I don't think we have any actions on this one. Okay, so essentially you have your member ID, your email, your password. If you forget your password, it's an easy thing at any time. If it's 2 in the morning and you're doing this, you can reset your password because you forgot. There shouldn't be any reasons that as long as you know your member ID, you can get in here. If you do have any issues, Alyssa can always, she's email and phone number is available in multiple places on the portal, the website. So hopefully we have plenty of places to make sure you get in as efficiently as possible. With that, we'll go to the next slide and there we go. Perfect. This is your main page. It looks pretty familiar to what we have seen in the past. The one little difference is over, people facing the screen to your right, it now says the farm plan and INMP summary report. It's going to be in one module. And as Alyssa clicks here, you can see this is where you update your membership information. If you have anything you need to change in terms of your acreage or your parcels that you haven't already done with invoicing, you can still do it here, including email, contact information, anything like that. And then click one more time, Alyssa. There we go. Also a reminder about your password reset. Let's say you wanted to change it, you can change it here. And then the last little Q in here is where that farm plan and INMP part is. So that's your main part. And then on the bottom, there's a PDF of the INMP worksheet. So if you need to see what that looks like or print it out to have on farm, it's there. And then also the member videos. If in the future you miss attending a meeting, you can go here and also watch the videos. Okay, next slide. All right, so this, once you go in, this very first part of the portal is going to give you some cues and a tour, and you can ignore it, you can X out of it, but the idea is, especially the first time, to help walk you through. It will pop up every time, just in case you need it. We never know, but you can always click out of it. So if it's annoying, just click the X and it'll go away. So with that tour, you'll get just some information about the farm plan and your INMP summary report. And this first page here talks about the management unit assignment. Go ahead and click next. And so this management unit concept, again, we introduced it last year with your farm plans, but really think of it this way. It's if you are growing the same crop with the same practices, which means that you kind of have on average the same amount of nitrogen applied and also the same yield, you can call that a management unit. And because we know not all farms are going to be on a parcel basis, but we have to report on a parcel basis, the idea is that it allows you to combine your parcels into a similar grouping. And that's what we call a management unit because they're managed the same way. But it's important to know specific crop, crop age, because we have the INMP too, it's got to have the same yield per acre and the same nitrogen applied per acre. So they're really, again, have to be managed in a similar way. Okay, next slide. Okay, so and then just some other places on here just to highlight. There is some helpful hints and FAQs on this page as well. There's if you click one more time, Melissa, I think it'll circle the informational video. There's a little video too to kind of help explain what management units are if it's confusing. Hopefully the first couple of times you'll start to get the hang of it. And also each year we'll repeat the same management units to make it easier, and you can adjust at that point, especially if you're dealing with a lot of parcels. It should help make it faster and easier. Okay, next slide. So here's an example of just kind of conceptually what this looks like. So the first thing we start with is a group of all your parcels that are enrolled with a coalition. Those are called the unassigned parcels. And then when you go through the process on the portal, you're going to assign them to these management units. So you can see where essentially you would take your unassigned parcels, you bring them over, and I'll show you kind of how we do this on the portal, but essentially it's going to start putting them into these buckets or these management units. In this case, we've got block 2, which is a lettuce, and then block 1, which is carrots. So that's kind of an example of how you can have one or multiple parcels under each management unit. That way you only have to report once and it applies it to all of the parcels. Okay, so let's go through what this looks like. All right, this was supposed to have actions that got a little messed up. So the first thing to look at is behind the circles and the arrows, because those were supposed to come in a little later. But essentially you have with each row is your management unit. So remember when we talked about block 2, it had 2 parcels associated with it. Here, it's block 1 that has 2. So you can kind of see the carrot block 1 and the carrot block 1 there. The thing to know is you can edit it here. So you can come in, you can edit your crop, you can edit the acreage. So you may have 100 acres enrolled for the parcel, but maybe 50 is carrots and 50 is lettuce. And so you can go in here and actually split out your parcel by the amount of acreage of the different crops. Or if they're managed in different, if you have permanent crops, for example, and one's like a mature half of your parcel is mature trees and the other half is young trees, that's going to be important down the road to kind of keep track with age. The other things you can edit here is your management unit description, which is the MU description. Your parcel shouldn't be edited. That's coming from your membership. We try to keep that very consistent so it's mappable. And then you get over into the years, the crop acres, and then there's on the right this crop rotation. So I wanted to just take a minute and try to explain this. If you have a crop that's in rotation within the same year, the way that you would enter this into the system is this is where the fun action was supposed to come in, duplicate. You click this duplicate, and then it would make another row that would be identical. And then you would change your crop, and you would mark that those are then yes for a crop rotation. So for example, if we said block 2, which is this middle one here, let's say we'd hit duplicate, we'd make a new row, and let's say it's lettuce for half the year and cauliflower for the other half of the year. You would have 2 rows that both say block 2. One would say lettuce, one would say cauliflower, and then they would both say crop rotation. And that's how we would know that they are a rotating crop on the same piece of land. Okay, next slide. So once you have your management units, all of that work is to try to make the rest of this easier. So again, the more things you have kind of managed and farmed the same way, the easier this is going to be. The more complex farming and crop system you have, the more work it is going to be. I hate to say that. But so you'll see here the step 1 where it says management units. It lists your carrots, your acreage, and your crop. That's already there, right? We already took care of that. So now we just have to fill in your nitrogen source, your yield, and additional information. So some important features is that your progress is saved along the way. So if you needed to leave and come back, there's places in here that will say that will allow you to save your progress. We have that button there at the bottom to save progress and be able to come back where you stopped. And then I don't know if I had actions in this. There we go. Great. So we do have the management unit here. And if you click one more time, it'll kind of highlight that nitrogen sources. So we have the nitrogen in the irrigation water, the organic amendments, the dry liquid fertilizers, and then the foliar fertilizers. So if you've been filling out your worksheet, this should match what's on your worksheet that you have. You should have a column on your worksheet of your planned, and then actuals. What you can do is you take your actuals and you put them in here into those cells that kind of follow that same row. You have to fill in something for all of those rows. Those cells on that row. So for example, if If you don't know your nitrogen, your irrigation water, we have some FAQs on the website of how to help find that information. If you still don't know, you can put 0. We're not expecting there to be a lot of nitrogen in this area in your surface water. If it is groundwater that you're using, that should, it's recommended that you should be testing for it so that you know what's also being applied on top of what you're applying in a fertilizer or organic amendments. But there does need to be something put in each of those cells. So just kind of knowing that before you kind of walk into this. And then the yield part. So this is, and again, both the nitrogen applied and your yield is on a per acre basis. So for all of your parcels, just keep that in mind. You're looking on an average per acre basis for that management unit. So your yield is going to be on a per acre basis. It's going to default to pounds, but then you can change the production unit if you measure your harvested yield in a different unit, and then there's a drop down menu for that information. And I don't know if I have another pop-up, but there's a yield information. We have 2 more columns over to your right, if you're looking at the screen. And thanks, Alyssa. Sorry about that. The yield information, that would be if you had non-bearing, if you have juvenile, if you've got some information, you didn't apply fertilizer, right? So definitely take a look. There's a drop-down menu of all of the categories. Take a look at that. That gives us more information that there might be a reason when we look at the amount applied, and Perry will talk about crop coefficients, which leads to how much is removed by the crop, which is where yield comes in. That information becomes really important, as well as any comments. We love comments. So anything you want to tell us that you think might be important, because at the end of the day, all of this will eventually come into reporting: amount of nitrogen applied, amount of nitrogen removed based on your yield. And we're trying to make sure we're telling an accurate story of what's happening in the farming world and what's happening in this year, which we all know there's a lot of different things that happen. So this is a good way for us to get it into the system and have it together. Okay, so then we move on from here to the next slide. And one thing we wanted to note here, that if you needed to, like before you move on and say progress, it's going to say, are you sure this all looks good? Because it's going to hold on to this management unit information for the rest of the survey. So your management practices, your nitrogen, your irrigation, your sediment erosion, pesticides, et cetera, is all going to be built off of these management units. So this is a good place when we have these extra like warnings. If you need to change something, if you forgot a parcel, if you realize you actually are managing your parcels differently, you can go back at this step and change it. If not, it's kind of holding it in place for moving forward. Okay, so then we go to the next slide. We're moving on now from the nitrogen applied and removed information to your practices. And this is going to look similar now to what you do with the farm plan, where you've got your management units, you've got your practices across the top, and then you can click which practices you're applying for those management units. And it's the irrigation methods, your irrigation efficiency practices, and then your nitrogen efficiency practices that are part of your INMP. And this also is the same information required on your farm plan, as I mentioned earlier. We're just asking for it once so that we can report on for both of those surveys. And you do have to fill in all of the responses. We do have some handy little boxes at the top. If you're doing the same practice for all of your management units, you click that. It populates it all the way down. The idea is to try to make it easy for you. You don't have to, hand enter too much. But again, trying to make this as user-friendly as possible. And yeah, that's the check all. You can barely see it at the bottom, the check all feature. All right. So now, then you come to this page and it'll ask you for an electronic signature. This is you saying that, I am providing this to the coalition to provide to the regional board on my behalf. I'm signing this, that this is true and accurate for my farming operation. And now we can move on to the farm plan. When you finish the INMP summary report, you'll get to a page that looks like this. And go ahead and click once. There we go. It'll say here, complete for your INMP summary report. And then if you click again, it'll say incomplete for your farm plan. So you'll know where you're at in the whole process of INMPs and farm plans of getting things complete. This is a page now that you can come back to. You can see your progress. There's other places on the portal that will show you a progressive bar to let you know where you're at in your progress as well. And again, you can leave, you can come back, you know, if you get distracted. We have lots of points in here to continue to save so that you can revisit when you need to. Okay, so we are going to continue survey. Great. And this gets us into our farm plan. We have a note on here, same as last year. So this should be familiar. The questions are, you know, what kind of wells do you have on your property? So we have those questions. We have the additional practices that you have not answered yet, which are the sediment and erosion control practices, the common agricultural chemicals that you apply in your field, which is that text box. So just kind of putting in the most common products that you apply, and then information about where your property drains to. So again, we've tried to, same as last year, we try to make that as easy as possible to move through it as quickly as you can. And let's see, what do we have as the next one? Again, another signature so that we know that this is your farm plan information, you're submitting it, you're signing that this is being submitted for you to the coalition. And that, let's see. Now, once you have both of your surveys completed, like Perry was saying, if you do have an on-farm inspection, you can go onto your portal, you can show the regional board, you can print the surveys, you can have a hard copy. This will be in here for perpetuity. So you can see last year's farm plan and print it, and then this year's INP and farm plan, and so on for years. So if you don't like paper versions, just know it's always in the portal for you. It does not have the INP worksheet though. So don't forget about that. That's needs to be on farm every March for the upcoming year, your plan for the year. The other thing I want to note is maybe you get to the very end and you go, oh no, I forgot something. So we do have ways that you can go back to review your responses, but if you really did miss like a parcel, for example, or you realized you grouped a parcel incorrectly, you can reset your survey. It does mean you have to redo everything. So if you hit the reset survey button, it will take you to the beginning to your management units as you had them laid out, and there you can adjust. And then once you adjust, then you have to fill everything out again. But that does give you the control. If you did mess up, you can still go back and fix it. Yes.
So you're saying, would it delete some of the information when you hit reset, or is it, let's say we did it's not going to delete all the other stuff, right?
Lisa, I'm going to ask you, does it actually delete it when you go back to the management unit, or? Yeah,
go back.
It goes
So
back to the
all
beginning, right?
After that, is it gone and we have to redo the whole thing again, or is it just going to be the addition that we add? I'm just curious.
Okay, I'm going to repeat the question is clarification, and I'm looking to Lisa and the audience to help me too. The clarification is when I say you go back and you have to redo everything, the question is, does it actually delete it? So if we thought about our block 1 and 2 and you wanted to just change block 2, is block 1 still good? Do you have to change anything? And Lisa's nodding, yes, you're good.
As you're going back through, you'll see what you checked for the management unit that still matches up from before, but that information is not submitted. You still have to go through the whole process to actually submit the survey, but it doesn't temporarily say what you entered.
So the rest of the survey.
It'll be pre-populated. So I'll repeat it, Lisa, so everyone can hear it, because I don't think they can hear as well from the audience. But if you go back, and apologies for not having kind of these screenshots, we're still kind of in development phase at the moment. But if you go back, you'll see your management units. And if you change one of them, it'll still, so what Lisa said, temporarily holding on to. If you move forward, it'll show you temporarily what you would put in, but you have to click the save and move forward so that it saves in the system. If you were to leave at that point, I think it would go away, right, Lisa? Like if you didn't hit the save button.
In a temporary table, I think just the important part is to know, even though it's showing up, you haven't submitted your survey back.
Okay.
But it should come back in a later session.
Okay, so I misspoke for people on the phone. It should save in the temporary table, but you have not officially submitted. If you go backwards, you have to resubmit. So you have to go through the steps and say, yeah, this all looks good. But to that point, not necessarily. I did think that you had to redo everything. So good clarification. We have it set up to make it a little easier to hold on to what you had, and you could edit at that point. Good question. Okay, and then Alyssa, what else do I have after that? I think we get, okay, so then this is back to kind of your dashboard and your portal. We do have some FAQs online, so if you have questions, please check out your resources there. This is for the INP worksheet, the summary report, as well as the farm plan. Your progress will be saved. Don't forget November 14th. Make sure you're ready. Try to get all of your actuals written down so that when you come in here, you're ready to go with it. And then we also, we have places in here to contact the coalition if you get stuck. Okay, I will pass it back to Perry unless there's any questions online or
Question.
yes.
On the reporting for nitrogen, you have different forms like granular and organic and all that. You show pounds. Is it pounds of N that you're requesting?
Pounds of nitrogen, yes. Yeah. This is going to go back to it. All of those are pounds per acre nitrogen. So there is a place on the portal. We have these kind of accordion spots to give information about. It's not really shown here, but if this was a full computer screen above, there would be these kind of accordion spots that you can click on, and there's some formulas in there for calculating the nitrogen in irrigation water, for example. If you have a concentration, how do you convert it? I think we might have some common conversions for different nitrogen products too. So I think we have some of those resources available to help
like
convert it.
If you do 50 gallons, it'll give you the conversion to pounds per acre.
I think we got into a problem. I missed a couple of meetings where our units for the organic, I think they were probably being calculated at 2% or 1%.
Gotcha.
And double the amount of N that we were using.
Yeah, it's an important.
That was an automatic entry like you're describing, or if that's, I don't know if there's a presumptive formula that kicks it up to that or not.
I wouldn't think they would. That would be for reference only for you to go do that calculation. And the other more common mistake that was made early on is I put 1,000 pounds of triple 15 on. They put 1,000 pounds of nitrogen when it's actually 150 pounds of nitrogen.
Yeah.
So that's the important conversion. But also what you're talking about, that percentage of actual N in manures, compost, and all those things are a little harder to figure out. And we usually use, and I don't know if we have common, like compost commonly is 4% nitrogen, typically green waste compost. So if you've never tested it, you can use a 4 to 5%. Manure varies all over the place, steer manure, but versus getting an actual test for every load that you bring onto the farm.
Well, they give us an analysis.
Yeah, right. Yeah, some do. Yeah, most do.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because I think another thing too is if you realize later that you did have an error and you needed to edit it, you should be able to go back and edit up to a certain time period until we start reporting. Or again, if you get stuck, contact the coalition. We can make those changes for you.
Yeah, if you ever find a mistake, even a year later, let us know.
Yeah.
It can be adjusted. I mean, as long as we put a memo in that described what the discrepancy was.
Yeah, because it's creating a history, right? We are going to be using this data probably for many years, and the more accurate we can be, the better. And then we try to do some QC at the end, so over time it'll get better because we'll have better metrics to know this doesn't seem likely. Seems like a very odd amount to the, like the example of the 1,000 pounds of triple. Yes, yeah. Like those are things that hopefully we can spot and say that doesn't seem quite right, and then we can follow up with a grower and say just making sure you didn't convert that incorrectly.
Well,
okay. Yeah.
Got a question. On organic compost, are they actually reporting that same year the full amount that you're applying, or is it being applied over 2 or 3 years as a re-release?
It should be the amount that you're applying for that year. I think the importance of us having it categorized certain ways is down the road potentially doing different analysis of what does that mean for how quickly something could, like the nitrogen from that source can make its way to groundwater, which is going to vary between compost and like something liquid.
So the rule of thumb for compost depends on whose thumb. I have to short one along is that 40% the first year, 40 to 30% the second year, and 30 to 20 the third year. And it depends, unfortunately, it depends on temperature, moisture, soil, all those different things. Usually you don't want to put, if you got analyzed 4% and you put on X amount, you don't want to, that's not going to be available the first year. From what agronomists tell me in research, it doesn't release that quickly.
Correct, but you gotta report it all in that year you apply.
No, you report it in the year it's available. Because that's going to mess up your coefficient. If you put all of your compost in that year as being available to the crop, that's incorrect. Is it not? I mean, that's what I've been telling
I
growers
think
for
we
years.
had always assumed we would do it on the back end because that's a lot of calculation for growers to be, I think, consistent with. But maybe, and this is a good area that probably does need some
Every
more
time we bring this
discussion.
up,
It gets a little more
squirrely.
complex, but yeah, and I can take a look. I know we have FAQs. I can take a look too and see how clear they are and make sure that we've got that more clearly identified. The main thing is, I mean, I would say consistency. So when we look at having a mix of different ways that people are reporting, it's not going to be good. So we'll go back and make sure that we've got that clearly laid out. Okay.
Anybody else? All right. So talk about our nitrogen crop coefficients. So this is really the only metric that regulators have available to figure out how much actual nitrogen is moving past the root zone into groundwater. Probably 15 years ago, when the discussions first began with the state water board on how we're going to determine impact of fertilizer use, they said, let's just get the reports of what they're applying. And we argued that that is not going to be a true value of what's a true amount of what may be going into groundwater, right? Because we put on fertilizer, the crop uses it. So to say I use 150 pounds doesn't mean 150 pounds is going into groundwater. So we came back with this approach, and this has been used in other areas of the world and the US, but we came back with this approach of we need to find out what does a crop typically remove at a certain yield level of that nitrogen. So what this does is it begins to give regulators and the coalitions that are tracking it an idea of what the potential is for excess. So that's one way to measure how are we doing. Since the program started, we're going to have in 20 years, we're going to have a trend of what's those efficiency numbers going to look like, what's the excess going to look like. The other way is then having a groundwater trend monitoring network. But that is a very difficult thing to use in a real-time basis, because what you sample in the groundwater now probably made its way to groundwater depending on the depth. Dozens of years ago, decades ago, it could have been from the farm 10 miles away or from a wastewater treatment plant. So trend monitoring is an indicator, but it's not the best way to tell where are we in how we're performing in minimizing the excess nitrate moving past the root zone. Okay, next slide. So the crop nitrogen coefficient, I've used this forever. It's the number. It is our grade scale that we're going to be judged by for a long time until something comes up better, and it's not looking like there's anything out there. But it's a good indication of how efficiently we're growing a crop, efficiently from the standpoint of how much fertilizer you put on and how much is removed in your yield or with or the tree when you're in permanent crops. Some crops have some really good numbers, very well studied, been looked at for decades. Others, there's very scant data. And I'm going to give you an example here, what we've been doing in the Valley. But these good numbers, because it is the number, we've got to talk about intra-industry, intra-commodity group. How good are our numbers that our growers are going to be held to for dates down here, for table grapes growing down here, all these different crops that are here that aren't grown somewhere else, or because the conditions are different, is it the same crop nitrogen coefficient? Some of these crops are going to need more study and more analysis. Analysis meaning you take yield, you grind it up, they do a nitrate dry weight analysis and come up with a nitrogen removed from that yield amount. CDFA, excuse me, their website probably has the best amount of fertilizer guidelines and crop coefficients in the state by far for our local needs. So just Google FREP, Fertilizer Research Education Program. and it'll pop up in your server. Next slide. So what this does is it just converts yield to nitrogen remove. So we'll use this example here with carrots, where you have a conversion of, you have a 30,000 pound crop. It uses 30, the crop coefficient is this number you see, 0.004. So that's multiplied by that yield, and it tells you how many pounds of nitrogen per acre that it's removing from the field. So you can see the calculation here, 30,000 pounds times 1.0014 equals 42 pounds of N remove with harvest. So if you're putting on 42 pounds of applied nitrogen, there's no excess. Now that's what's called a 1-to-1 ratio. So it's 1.0. That means the amount you put on is the amount you take off. That's what's called the applied over removed. That's using a calculation of 1-to-1 with a dash between, or you do it this way, and it's 42 pounds per unit of 42 pounds of nitrogen for that amount of yield that's removed. Okay, next slide. And so in the Central Valley, actually, MLJ and I were working together on with the East San Joaquin Coalition. They did a pretty thorough literature study of what are the numbers that we have for the Central Valley crops. And as you can see here, excuse me, our big acreage crops were in pretty good shape, reasonable shape. We have a fair number of smaller acreage crops that don't have large commodity groups where they're either poor, terrible, or there's no numbers at all. So this is the exercise we in the coalition and commodity groups over the next 6 months need to start talking about, is what numbers do we have for these crops grown down here that may be different than what either FREP has developed. Hopefully they have developed some of these crops that are down here, these crop nitrogen coefficients, or we're going to have to do some grinding up crops to figure out what that nitrogen is, the nitrogen content. And I'm not sure if we'll do this exercise with MLJ to go through, but I think we're going to need to do it just so we understand for your all purposes what we have available for information to, if you will, to grade you as far as how you're doing for your crop nitrogen applied versus how much that's removed. So I kind of went fast with that. Any questions on that? That makes sense. Okay, so the other way that this is looked at, as I mentioned, is the A over R. That's where it's applied divided by removed. And that could be a 1.0. A 2 means if I applied 100 and the crop takes out 50, that means I'm on a 2. That means I put twice as much as what the crop needed. Whereas the A minus R is I put on 100 pounds, the crop took off 50, I had 50 pounds of excess. So that's 2 different ways that it's going to be looked at. And for our reporting, we do the A over R, correct?
We do both. We do A over R and A minus R.
So the report that you get back as a grower is going to compare those in a chart with the other, to grow lettuce, all the other lettuce growers that we get data from, you're going to be compared to internally as to how you compare where your fields compared to other lettuce growers, for instance. And it isn't, we admit always, and regulators understand this, it's not a perfect measure, but it gives us the start until something better is developed. Several years ago, probably 10 years ago, we got a grant from CDFA to go out with what are called suction lysimeters. And these are tubes you put in the ground to about 3 feet below the root zone, and you grab the water as it's moving past the crop into the groundwater, and you grab that soil pore water, and you do an analysis of that water to see, like you have a 6-inch root growth. We didn't lettuce, so you would measure 3 feet down, which means that water and the nitrate in it is probably on the way to the groundwater. We did a 20-acre field, and we got so many different results. We spent $100,000 sampling water throughout the whole summer. We got wildly different numbers throughout that field. So that is so expensive. That is not a practical way for us to show what we're doing in agriculture at this time. Maybe the advanced technology will help us with instrumentation, but for now, all we have is this kind of a I don't want to call it hokey, but it's all we got right now. So even though we can shoot holes in it as farmers, it's the only thing we got at this point. So that's why, again, back to the crops we grow, we want to have good crop nitrogen coefficients. So the bar they hold us to is a bar that we can say, okay, that sounds pretty reasonable. So the thing you got to understand, you all do, and I'm sure you're ahead of me on this. So there's so many variables that the timing, when did you put that 50 pounds on? Did you put it on at the beginning of the year? Did you split it 10 times over a multiple applications? And then how much was in each application? And then the timing amount of water. If you put way too much water on, when you fertilize, you're going to push that nitrogen past the root zone. So there's a lot of variables out there, but this at least gives us an idea, an indicator of whether there's excess nitrogen that's going down possibly into groundwater. All right, next slide. And then let's see, this is kind of what I was talking about. Reducing A minus R, that excess means less nitrogen is leached to groundwater. Over time, the groundwater quality should get better. Where there's groundwater that's within reasonable distance from the surface, there should be changes in the groundwater quality as we reduce the amount of excess. And let's see, our only option here from the standpoint of reducing that excess is doing a better job with fertilizer application efficiency. Splitting the applications. I know one thing we've been pushing a lot in the Central Valley with drip and micro is put that nitrogen on at the end of the cycle. Put it on in the last 75 to 90% of your irrigation set, so that it doesn't push it past the root zone. If you're putting it on the beginning of the irrigation set, you're pushing that fertilizer probably past the root zone. Of course, it depends on the soil type, but that's one practice that's got some pretty solid research behind it to show its efficiency. And then as other management practices come up, we're going to be pushing those forward. There's work going on all around the state to try to figure out how to do a better job with, to show that we're doing a better job with our efficiency with nitrogen. Okay, next slide. All right, so then we're also moving into an analysis called the identification of what's called outliers. So you can imagine all the lettuce growers, we get a chart and we plot the amount of nitrogen they put on for that crop and their yield. So there's going to be the classic bell curve. Bell curve, you all remember that from school. But a bell curve is going to show you where the majority of growers are. Typically, we've done this with many crops in the valley already. There's a bell curve. And then over here on the right-hand tail of that are growers, for some reason, they're either not getting good yields, putting on more fertilizer than they need, or other variables. You're going to show up as an outlier on the far right-hand side. So we as a coalition will be, when we send the report back to you, we're going to be showing whether that parcel, that management unit is an outlier. And so there's what we do to come up with that number is it's going to take 3 years of data. Once we've collected 3 years of your data, that's the first year we're going to send out reports that name your outlier, whether you have an outlier parcel. It's not an outlier grower, it's an outlier parcel. Because you can have 50 parcels. We had this many times where they're all fine, one parcel's out of whack for some reason. And that's what the quality data comes into play a lot, is to making sure, we're using the right numbers when we fill out these reports. So I won't, unless you all are kept into calculation or statistics, we use the interquartile range to calculate the outlier status. That's as much as I know about statistics. So if anybody wants to explain it.
One caveat is
okay.
We do have, this is what we do in the Central Valley. We do have to propose the outlier methodology to the regional board and have it approved. So it's actually not dictated in the order how we do the outliers. We do have some flexibility, but at the moment, what has been used in the past is this I2R. So if you remember your box and whisker plots, right? It's the whiskers on from that, the main part. And I think that a way to think that distribution in more simplistic terms, the tail ends of your distribution.
Right. Okay, so the other thing that's been really helpful for the major crops that it's been developed is this crop nitrogen consumption curve. I think a lot of us that grow crops, I've grown watermelons and peaches all my life, so I kind of know when they're taking it up just by watching it. But it really helps when we get these crop consumption curves. These are curves that were developed by literally grinding up the crop every phase of the growth standard. So they ground up those plants, etc., all the way through harvest, and try to determine when is that crop consumption of nitrogen occurring. And then this helps with the planning, especially when you use drip, of when you're applying nitrogen. So these are some of the tricks that you see and others are developing to help us better understand and ways to improve our nitrogen efficiency. So the main idea, obviously, is to match that application to the crop consumption curve. And I understand you don't have almonds here. Good for you all. You didn't plant any almonds down here because the market's crashed. But so the almond uptake has been very well documented by, again, grinding up trees at different times of the season to find out when is that kernel being filled, when is that tree taking up nitrogen, and we come up with these, again, for trees, for almonds, and crop consumption curve. What this has shown us and what we've really been pushing with almonds is don't apply nitrogen after harvest. You're wasting your time. If you have a big rain year, you got sandy ground, you're probably pushing that nitrogen into the groundwater because the tree isn't eating it. It's not using it. So don't waste your time applying it that time. And then they determined also that the converse to that with almonds especially is that bloom and fruit set is determined or is using the nitrogen from the previous crop year to make that crop. It's not being made by the nitrogen applied at that moment. Okay, next slide. All right, so let's see. This is a duplicate. I think we did this one already. Okay, go to the next one. All right, so Leslie, you're going to talk about this?
Yeah, I can get through it.
All right. This is a new program that's been introduced into the.
Yeah, and we also have Zoe here from the Coachella Valley Water District too. This is I took some snippets from their website just to give a bit of a teaser of this program that's happening and the work plans that have been in development for quite a few years now. But just kind of bringing it back to why we're kind of highlighting that this exists and it's important for growers to be aware of it is because there are this multiple pressures about understanding the nitrogen sources to groundwater in the area. And groundwater is a big aquifer. There's a lot of geographic areas that are on top of it and a lot of sources beyond ag. Ag is just one component that feeds into the SNMP, the Coachella Valley Salt and Nutrient Management Plan. And it's been developed by all of these agencies. They're listed here. And it is going to result in a basin-wide plan to manage salt and nutrients. So as ag in the ILRP is working through its efforts and the things that Perry's talking about with the coefficients, understanding what's applied with the harvested yield in, it's going to inform and I think improve the understanding of ag's contribution to this bigger picture. So kind of again, taking it from more of this, what's happening right now in your requirements as a member and kind of bringing into context of what kind of this bigger picture of all sources, not just ag and the nitrogen sources, and salt too. I shouldn't ignore salt. Next slide. So again, these are kind of stolen from their website. They have a lot of really good information. They have their plans listed there as well as any workshops they're having or meetings and timelines for their technical reports. So essentially, this Coachella Valley Salt and Nutrient Management Plan must maximize the beneficial use of groundwater basin. It's got to protect groundwater quality pursuant to state law and anti-degradation, balance regulatory, social, environmental, and economic interests, and then be developed through technically defensible methods to ensure approval by the Regional Water Board, along with acceptance and participation of all stakeholders in the Coachella Valley. Okay, next slide. Where they're at right now is they're working on some of their technical scopes. They're click one more time. It's this first part here that Wes Yost is the consultant that is spearheading this effort, and they're doing a lot of the work to do this technical memo right now, where I click one more time, where they're looking to characterize current groundwater quality and sources of salt and nutrient loading. So that's really where they're at right now. They're working with a coalition. They've asked for our help and information, and their goal is to bring in the best information to kind of reflect with what we do know and what we don't know, and putting those caveats in and trying to make it clear of where we still maybe have some gaps in understanding, where we need to do more research, gather more information. And then the next slide is a timeline. Again, this is from their website, which is listed in the upper hand corner. And they're kind of right in here. It started in July of 2022, extended through this summer of 2023. I think they're still working on the final touches of this, but that's kind of just to give you an overview of the amount of work and effort that is projected for this whole effort. Yeah, go ahead, Zoe.
Technical memo 1 on loading, which is what we've all been talking about today, should be published tomorrow.
Okay, and then for those online, Zoe from the Coachella Valley Water District was mentioning that this tech memo here, that where the arrow is coming in, should be available online tomorrow. So if you are interested, you should be able to find it. Again, the website is in the upper, facing the screen right-hand corner.
And there will be a 30-day public comment period.
And a 30-day public comment period. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Zoe. Okay, I think we are getting close on time. So I'm going to run through the surface and groundwater monitoring program that you guys have. So we'll go to the next slide. And again, Coachella Valley Water District does the sampling for you. It's an order requirement. The purpose of surface and groundwater is to understand the impact of agricultural discharge on surface and groundwater. So the networks, both your surface and groundwater, is set up to be representative of the Coachella Valley Irrigated Lands Program Coalition, area. And we need to show that we're being protective of beneficial uses. So the way we do that is there's trigger limits or water quality objectives listed in the order. We evaluate your data against those limits. If we stay with a concept of nitrogen, for example, in groundwater, if you're above 10, that's exceeding the limit for drinking water purposes, right? That's the beneficial use. It needs to be available for drinking water. If it's above 10, that's where we have a water quality impairment. So CVWD does the sampling. The samples get shipped to a laboratory, analyzed. We compare the results to the thresholds, and then we report to the regional water board that information. Okay, next slide. These are your sites in the coalition. They've been the same sites for even before this current order. The water district has been monitoring these locations, so there is a pretty good history of information. Oh, sorry, this is groundwater. I did not look closely. Split that. Groundwater. This is our second year of groundwater sampling. We just started this last year. There has been monitoring this year and last year. Our Coachella Valley Water District just monitored in September, so we don't have those results yet. But this is showing your 2022 results, which is representative of your region. We've got a few different types of wells that are used for monitoring, or that they sample. The couple of monitoring wells, which are more kind of smaller casings. You have some municipal wells, irrigation, domestic or drinking water, and then we have one that's we have it still listed as unknown. But this gives you an idea of the different concentrations of nitrate that were detected last year. We don't have those results yet, but probably in January we will. So the next grower meeting will have that information for you.
Melissa, it
Yeah.
might be worth it. To go back to that. It's worth mentioning that in the Central Valley, that 11 is more, you add a 0 onto that in many of our areas, 110 and 3182. Those are not uncommon numbers. You're showing the highest is 15. These are really good numbers, is what I want to make. You got one well above domestic, but the others are in pretty good shape. The 11 is a little over, but the point being, this is pretty good data. So,
And a second point is particularly when you look at CVILC 004, that is where there's tile drainage, where there's clays, so that is actually being intercepted, and it goes to the Salton Sea. So when you look at wells that are deeper, these are very, very shallow wells, so almost like first contact with groundwater. When you look at the deeper wells, overall, East Valley is in great shape with regards to nitrogen levels. And this part of this SNMP is defining beneficial uses. And we've always argued that really shallow area is not being used for drinking water. All of the drinking water wells are used to define.
Yeah.
Another reason to stay engaged in the process.
Exactly, good point. And it is a trend monitoring program too. That's another key point, is that this is to evaluate from year to year to see changes in the concentration and to evaluate this over, we should have 5 to 7 years before we could actually call something a trend. So it's going to take a few years to gather this information. Okay. So now surface water. Now this is where the data have been collected for quite a few years now. There's 5 locations that are being monitored. You can see there on the map, they kind of correspond to the site number here. The very top location is this is where we're above ag. And then from there it goes in through the system where there's ag drainage. And the yellow areas are those kind of drainage areas, and some of them are pulling in the tile drainage into kind of where they come into the canal. Okay, next slide. These are the constituents that are monitored. So there's monitoring that happens quarterly, and then the twice a year pesticides are added to the suite. And so we've got a list of nutrients at the top here: phosphorus, nitrogen, different types, TDS, which is like a salt, specific conductivity, so 2 measurements of salt, and then temperature, pH, DO. And then the 4 pesticide, espenvalerate, which is a pyrethroid, atrazine, or herbicide, chlorpyrifos, even though it is banned, and malathion. And then the results, we didn't put all the results because most of them are very low, if not, most important, they're not exceedances. We did have 1 exceedance in 2023 of chlorpyrifos. If we go to the next slide, we're going to have this big but it was detected at our upstream above ag, and looking at the pesticide use reports, there was no applications. There's no applications of chlorpyrifos. It's been banned. So we've communicated with regional board. We did have to report it's an exceedance, but we put that it's not due to ag discharge. Okay, next slide. So the other thing that is in the order is fish monitoring. So last year we talked a little bit about this. We had an extension to this year. We put in for a permit to conduct fish monitoring. You have to get that with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. You have to say exactly what you're going to do and which fish you're going to catch, and all the incidental things that could happen while you're out there fishing. So there's a lot that goes into it. We did finally get a permit. However, we've had some conversations just getting that all worked out. We have a quality assurance project plan, but when you look at the amount of effort and the work involved, it has raised your guys' cost quite a bit. So we've been talking with the coalition of what that means and how to kind of work through that increased cost. Perry already highlighted your dues have gone up. This is a big concern of adding this additional cost this year. The coalition has been talking with regional board about those concerns and how to work through this requirement. But just so you know, at the moment, it's still in your order. It's still a requirement. The coalition is working to figure out when and how this is going to happen to keep you in compliance. And I think we'll just keep you posted on it. Yeah. And next slide. The last thing, just as a reminder, like you saw the exceedances, there was just the 1 chlorpyrifos. This is good. But if, just in case, something changes and we do get more exceedances, this is what would go into play, is that when we have more than 3 consecutive exceedances, then we need to develop a water quality restoration plan. And that gets into, well, what are growers going to do to demonstrate that they're not causing this problem, that they're no longer contributing or causing to this water quality problem. So this is where we get into trend analysis and what's the possible sources of it, what farmers can do in that area with management practices to mitigate for this, schedule of implementation of additional practices, and then additional monitoring and reporting. So we're really hoping we don't get to that point. The water quality is looking very good, so that's all positive, but it's just kind of a good reminder if we started to see some problems, this is what happens next. Next slide. And this is a good loud slide, a reminder of your deadlines. If you have not paid your dues, I want to highlight that one first. Late fees are about to go out. They are hefty. So if you just make sure you've paid your invoice and you get that in, because it's going to be quite a big amount of money to pay if you are late. So if you even here, you can reach out to Alyssa, you can let Lisa know, we'll put your name down and say, hey, this person needs to pay their dues. They don't want to get the late fee. We're giving you a little bit of grace period in here. The last November 7th, I think, is the due date that we are going to be sending out those late invoices with those fees. So please pay your dues. And then a reminder about the February deadline for your INMP and farm plan. That should be available. The portal should be available no later than mid-November. And I think those are those big main red ones to keep in mind. I think that's, and then we have a little bit for Zoe too to give a right at the end. Yeah. Any questions online or in the room? Okay. All right. Oh, did you want to do this one?
Oh, yeah, let me do this one real quick.
I forgot about this slide.
Step into this one.
Go for it, Coach.
All right, yeah, Joey, can you do this one, please? So the dues went up this year. This program is turning into a record-keeping challenge and building up the system, the computer system, and getting the surface water, the trend monitoring network for groundwater in place. It has increased the cost. The board had to make a decision to go up in the per acre fee. We also are having some of the existing growers drop out of the program. And we've been talking to the regional board staff about what their options are for these agriculture operations in the valleys. So as I mentioned real early on, if you're commercial, you need to be in the irrigated lands program. So if you were in the program, your name was submitted with our membership list of previous years, or the growers' names were. So the regional board is going to be reaching out to those folks to find out what's going on. From a number of reasons, from our side, from the board side, it's an equity issue. These guys, these operators and you all that are paying dues are carrying the water for this program and for agriculture to be in compliance. So it's only fair that everybody participates, because they're all getting the benefit for it. You got to kind of look at it as an insurance policy. The water board has the statutory requirements they have to implement, and the compliance pathway is the third-party coalition, most cost-effective way to do that. So there's going to be some effort. If you have friends or otherwise that you know in farming that have been kind of blowing us off, just tell them to keep an eye out for their mailbox, because there may be a note coming from the water board in the not too distant future. So yeah. So the Central Valley went through this with the coalitions after the nitrogen reporting started, and there were growers decided they weren't going to participate, and eventually the growers or the regional board caught up with them, and there were fines in the $30,000 to $50,000 range for not complying with the program. So when it puts beneficial uses at risk, which is what this is considered, then they have the ability, the authority to levy what's called a civil liability, ACL, administrative civil liability fines toward operations or growers that are not complying with the regulations. So encourage participation.